I never believed in Bigfoot until I came face to face with one. What I'm about to tell you happened about 3 years ago, and I still wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it. My name doesn't matter, but what does is that I'm a park ranger with 15 years of experience dealing with wildlife. I've handled bears, mountain lions, wolves, and pretty much every dangerous animal you can imagine. Nothing could have prepared me for what I stumbled upon in those woods. It all started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, and I was looking forward to what should have been a quiet season before winter set in. My supervisor called around 7 a.m., which was unusual since he typically didn't get to the office until 9 a.m. His voice sounded different, tight in a way I'd never heard before. He told me they needed me for a special assignment, something classified that would pay triple my usual rate. Triple. That should have been my first red flag, but I desperately needed the money. My truck had broken down the week before, and the repair bills were eating into my savings. My daughter was starting college the following year, and every extra dollar counted. The supervisor wouldn't give me any details over the phone, just told me to meet at the ranger station at 6 a.m. the next morning. When I pressed him for more information, he was quiet for a moment before saying it involved a dangerous animal situation that required experienced personnel. He emphasized that discretion was absolutely critical and that I couldn't discuss the assignment with anyone, not even my wife. That night, I barely slept. Something about the whole conversation felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering me. I kept telling myself it was probably just a problematic bear or a mountain lion that had been attacking livestock or threatening hikers. Maybe the landowner was someone important who wanted the situation handled quietly. I got to the ranger station just before 6 and found a black pickup truck waiting in the parking lot. 3 other guys were already sitting in the back of the truck, and I could see their breath in the chilly morning air. I recognized 2 of them as rangers from neighboring districts. Both were solid, experienced guys I'd worked with before. The third man I'd never seen before, but he had the weathered look of someone who spent time outdoors. We all piled into the back of the truck without much conversation. Everyone seemed tense, which reinforced my guess that we were dealing with some kind of serious wildlife situation. The 2 rangers I knew gave me a nod, but nobody was in the mood to talk. We stowed our gear and settled in for what looked like it was going to be a long ride. The truck pulled out of the lot and headed toward the mountains on roads I'd traveled countless times. But after about 20 minutes, we turned onto a forest service road I'd never been on before. The road was rough, barely more than 2 tire tracks through the trees, and we bounced around in the truck bed as the driver navigated around rocks and fallen branches. About 40 minutes into the drive, one of the guys in the front passenger seat turned to look at us. He was wearing a business suit, which struck me as completely wrong for where we were supposed to be going. His tie was perfectly knotted, his shoes were polished, and his hair was combed as if he were heading to a board meeting instead of deep into the wilderness to deal with a dangerous animal. But what really caught my eye was his expression. The guy looked terrified. Sweat was dripping down his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his hands were trembling slightly as he gripped the back of his seat. His eyes had the wide, tormented look of someone who hadn't slept in days. He stared at each of us for a long moment before clearing his throat. His voice was shaky when he finally spoke. Nothing like the confident tone you'd expect from someone in an expensive suit. He told us we were all going to be getting more money than any of us had ever made on a single job. In return, we needed to keep our mouths shut about anything we saw out there. Anything. The situation was classified, and if word got out, there would be severe consequences. He didn't elaborate on what those consequences might be, but the fear in his voice made it clear he wasn't making empty threats. The way he delivered this message wasn't exactly threatening, but there was something in his eyes that was pure, desperate fear, as if he was as scared of this situation as he expected us to be. We all exchanged glances, but nobody said anything. The silence in that truck bed became heavy and uncomfortable. I found myself studying the guy in the suit more closely as we continued to drive. He kept checking his watch and glancing back at the woods behind us as if he expected something to come chasing after the truck. His hands never stopped trembling, and he kept wiping the sweat from his brow, even though the morning air was cold enough for the rest of us to be wearing jackets. After another hour of driving on increasingly rough roads, we finally stopped in what could barely be called a clearing. It was more like a spot where someone had cleared out enough trees to park a vehicle. The forest pressed in on all sides, dark and dense and somehow menacing even in the morning sunlight. The guy in the suit got out of the truck and walked to the tailgate, carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive and completely out of place. He put the briefcase on the tailgate and pulled out a detailed topographic map, the kind the military uses. The map showed terrain features I didn't recognize, though I thought I knew this part of the woods pretty well. He pointed to a spot deep in the wilderness where we were supposed to set up camp, maybe 8 or 10 miles from where we stood. Then he indicated another area about 2 miles from the camp where we needed to set traps. His finger trembled as he traced the route we were to take. The animal we were after was big and aggressive. He told us it had attacked several hikers in the last month, though he was vague about the details of these attacks. We needed to contain it, preferably alive if possible, but lethal force was authorized if necessary. He emphasized that the creature was extremely dangerous and that we shouldn't underestimate it regardless of our experience with wildlife. As we started unloading gear from the truck, my blood ran cold. These weren't ordinary animal traps. These were bear traps, but massive, bigger than anything I'd ever seen in 15 years of handling wildlife. Each trap was easily 3 feet wide with steel jaws that looked capable of snapping a telephone pole in half. The teeth were wickedly sharp and nearly 6 inches long. One of the other rangers whistled low as he lifted one of the traps. The thing had to weigh at least 100 pounds, maybe more. The chains attached to each trap were equally impressive. Heavy-duty steel links that looked like they belonged on a ship's anchor rather than an animal trap. "What exactly are we hunting?" one of the other rangers wanted to know. He was staring at the massive traps with the same uneasy feeling I had in my gut. These things were designed to catch something huge, something much bigger than any bear I'd ever encountered. The guy in the suit hesitated for a long moment, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "The animal was unidentified," he finally said. "Extremely large, definitely dangerous, and it had been terrorizing hikers for weeks." That was all we needed to know. He avoided our eyes when he said it, and I could see sweat forming on his forehead again, despite the cool morning air. None of us were stupid. We knew something was wrong with this whole situation, but the money was too good to pass up, and we all had our own reasons for needing the cash. So we loaded those massive traps into our backpacks along with the camping gear and started hiking into the woods. The guy in the suit stood by the truck, watching us disappear between the trees. The last I saw of him was his pale, sweaty face, nervously scanning the woods as if expecting something to leap out and grab him. The hike to our designated site was brutal. Those traps were incredibly heavy, and the terrain was rough. We spent the first few hours not talking much, everyone focused on navigating the dense undergrowth and not twisting an ankle on the uneven ground. But as we got deeper into the woods, I started to notice things that didn't feel right. The normal sounds of the forest, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, branches snapping, everything became strangely quiet. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. One of the rangers I knew, a guy named Derek, who had worked these mountains for almost 2 decades, suddenly stopped and held up his hand to signal us to halt. He was staring at something on the ground. His face had gone ashen. We walked over to see what he'd found. It was a footprint, but not like any footprint I'd ever seen before. The thing was at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. It had 5 clearly defined toes, almost like a human footprint, but enormously enlarged. The depth of the impression in the forest floor suggested that whatever made it weighed far more than any human. Derek knelt down beside the print, his hand trembling as he traced the outline. He'd worked these mountains for 19 years, he said quietly. He'd never seen anything like this. Never. The other two guys in our group came over, and I could see their expressions shifting from curiosity to something akin to fear. The third guy, the one I didn't know, pulled out his phone and tried to take a picture, but Derek snatched the phone out of his hand. "No pictures," he said curtly. "Didn't you hear what the suit guy said? This is classified." I looked around the surrounding area and found more footprints, all heading deeper into the area where we were supposed to set up camp. Whatever had made these prints was bipedal and walked upright like a human, but the size suggested something significantly larger and heavier than any person. We exchanged nervous glances, but nobody suggested turning back. We all needed the money too desperately, so we kept walking, now much more alert and nervous than before. The woods around us seemed to get darker and denser as we went. The trees here were old, massive firs and cedars that blocked out most of the sunlight. The undergrowth beneath our feet was thick and difficult to push through, and that unnatural silence continued. Not a single bird chirping, no squirrels, not even the sound of the wind moving the branches. It was as if every living thing in this forest had fled the area. It took us nearly 4 hours to reach the designated campsite, a small clearing next to a fast-running creek. The spot was big enough for our tents, but was surrounded on all sides by dense forest. As we set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My eyes kept being drawn to the surrounding trees, expecting to see something moving in the shadows. But every time I looked directly at a spot, there was nothing there. By the time we finished setting up camp, the sun was starting to dip. We decided to wait until morning to set the traps. Nobody wanted to venture further into the woods as darkness approached. We built a campfire and tried to make some food, but nobody had much of an appetite. Conversation was forced and kept trailing off into awkward silences. Derek finally broke the silence by saying what we were all thinking. "We're hunting Bigfoot, aren't we? That's what this is all about. Why the massive traps? Why the secrecy? Why we're getting paid this much?" Nobody answered immediately, but I could see on their faces that they'd all come to the same conclusion. The third guy, the one I didn't know, said that was ridiculous. Bigfoot wasn't real, just legends and stories made up by drunk hikers who couldn't tell the difference between a bear and a man. But his voice lacked conviction. We had all seen those footprints. We had all felt that unnatural sense of being watched. And we had all seen the genuine fear in the suit guy's eyes. The other ranger I knew, a guy named James who had a reputation for being pragmatic and no-nonsense, pulled out his rifle and started checking it. He methodically checked the action, made sure the magazine was full, checked the scope. He didn't say anything, but his actions made his thoughts clear. Whatever we were hunting, he was going to be prepared. The others followed suit, checking our weapons and gear. We had all brought rifles, heavy caliber rounds that could take down an elk or a grizzly bear. But as I looked at those massive traps stacked at the edge of our camp, I wondered if even that would be enough. Night fell fast in that deep forest. The fire provided some comfort, but its light only reached so far before it was swallowed by the surrounding darkness. We decided to take shifts, watching through the night, 2 people awake at a time, while the others tried to get some sleep. I took the first watch with Derek. We sat by the fire, rifles across our laps, staring out into the darkness beyond our circle of light. For the first hour, nothing happened. Just the crackling of the fire and the occasional sound of the creek running nearby. But then, around 10 p.m., we heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a howl, but unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Deep, resonant, almost human, but not quite. It sounded like it was coming from very far away, echoing through the mountains. The sound sent shivers down my spine. Derek stood up, his rifle raised, staring in the direction the sound came from. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I shook my head. I had no idea. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was like nothing in my wildlife training. The other two guys came out of their tents, woken by the sound. We all stood there, weapons in hand, listening. The howl came again, this time sounding closer, and then again, from a different direction, and then another, from another place. We were being surrounded. We could hear movement in the woods now, branches breaking, heavy footsteps. But we couldn't see anything beyond the circle of light from our campfire. The sounds moved around us in the darkness, never getting too close to the light, but making it clear that whatever was out there knew exactly where we were. James whispered that we should fire into the air, scare them off, but Derek shook his head. If they wanted to attack us, they would have done it by now. They're investigating, trying to figure out what we are. If we start shooting, we might provoke exactly what they told us to avoid. So we waited, every nerve on edge, listening to those movements in the darkness. The sounds continued for hours, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but never stopping completely. It was clear we were being watched, studied. Whatever was out there was intelligent. They were assessing us, learning about us before deciding what to do. When dawn finally arrived, the sounds stopped. As the light filtered through the trees, the forest fell silent again. We were all exhausted from fear and lack of sleep, but nobody suggested abandoning the mission. The money was too good, and in a way, now that we knew these things were real, we had to see it through. After a quick breakfast, we started setting the traps. We worked in pairs, never letting anyone stray too far from the camp alone. The spots the suit guy had marked on the map were all near game trails or water sources, places these creatures would likely travel. Setting each trap took nearly an hour. We had to dig them into the ground, cover them with vegetation, secure the chains to thick trees. The work was exhausting, and we were constantly looking over our shoulders, expecting to see something emerge from the woods. We were setting the fourth trap when James noticed something odd. There were trees nearby that had been stripped of bark about 8 or 9 feet off the ground. The marks looked like they had been made by hands, claws, or fingers scraping at the bark. And they were fresh, probably no more than a day or two old. Derek examined the marks closely. "Whatever made this," he said quietly, "is tall. Very tall. And it did this recently. They could be watching us right now." We all looked around nervously, but the forest was silent and still. There was no sign of movement, no sound, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. We finished setting all 6 traps by noon and headed back to camp. The plan was to wait, let the traps do their work. If we caught something, the suit guy had given us a satellite phone number to call. A team would come in to handle whatever we captured. Our only job was to secure the area until they arrived. That night was even worse than the first. The howls started just after dark, louder and more frequent than before. We could hear multiple voices now, at least 3 or 4 different creatures making noises at each other. It was as if they were communicating, coordinating. The sounds of movement in the woods became bolder. Whatever was out there was getting closer to our camp, testing our limits. We saw shadows moving just beyond the reach of our campfire light, large shapes moving with purpose. At one point, something threw a rock the size of a baseball directly into our camp. It whistled past Derek's head and hit one of our packs with a loud thud. The message was clear. They knew exactly where we were and could attack us if they wanted to. James wanted to shoot, but Derek stopped him again. "They're not attacking yet," he said. "They're just sending a message. If we start shooting, this could escalate quickly out of control, but keep your guns ready. If they cross into the light circle, shoot first and ask questions later." We spent another sleepless night, listening to those sounds in the darkness, seeing those shadows move at the edge of our vision. By the time morning arrived, we were all drained and jumpy. We had almost decided to pack up and leave when we heard sounds from the traps. A loud, almost human-like shriek of agony echoed through the woods, then the sound of chains clanging and something large struggling. We grabbed our weapons and ran toward the sound. It took us about 15 minutes to reach the trap, following the sounds of struggle and the shrieks. What we found when we got there still haunts me. The creature in the trap was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, even partially hunched over in pain. It was covered in dark, reddish-brown hair, densely matted around its body. But the hands were almost human. Large and powerful, yes, but with clearly defined fingers and an opposable thumb. The trap had caught its left leg, and I could see blood soaking into the fur around the biting steel. But what struck me most was its face. It wasn't ape-like. It was more human than that, with a broad forehead, deep-set eyes that showed intelligence and pain, a nose that wasn't quite human, but not quite simian either. The mouth was open in agony, revealing large teeth, some flat like a human's, others sharper. When it saw us, those eyes focused on us with an intensity that made me step back. It wasn't the look of a trapped animal, it was the look of someone, a person, who understood that we had done this deliberately, and in that look I saw fury, pain, fear, and something else, calculation. This thing was assessing us as threats, considering its options. Derek raised the satellite phone to call the extraction team, but before he could dial, we heard more sounds from the woods. The howls had returned, but they were different now, urgent, angry, and they were coming from multiple directions, closing fast. The creature in the trap responded with its own howl, a sound that pierced my chest with its power. It was a cry for help. "It's calling its family," James said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to move. Now." But before we could retreat back to camp, they burst from the woods. At least 4 of them, possibly 5. Massive, hairy, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for creatures of their size. They weren't running on all fours like apes. They ran upright, like humans, but faster than any human could move. We opened fire. The sound of the rifles was deafening in the silent woods. I saw that at least 2 of our shots hit home, one of the charging creatures stumbling as a bullet struck its shoulder, but it didn't stop. It barely slowed down. These things were incredibly resilient. We scattered, trying to get better firing angles, but they were on us too fast. One of the creatures grabbed James, its massive hands engulfing his torso like a child gripping a doll. James screamed, firing his rifle into the air as his feet left the ground. The creature held him aloft, looking at him as if deciding what to do with him. For a terrible moment, I thought we were about to watch him get torn apart in front of us. But then it threw James aside, not with full force, just enough to send him flying about 10 feet through the air to land hard against a tree. James didn't move after that. I couldn't tell if he was dead or unconscious. The other creatures moved toward the one that was trapped. They didn't attack us directly. Instead, they focused on freeing their family member. I watched one of them grab the steel jaws of the trap, muscles bulging under its skin as it pulled. The metal screamed in protest, but the creature didn't let up. With a roar that shook my ribs, it ripped the trap free, snapping the steel jaws as if they were twigs. The injured creature freed itself, limping but moving. Another of the creatures supported it, helping it to its feet. And then, before they retreated back into the woods, the creatures looked at us. They really looked at us. And in those eyes, I saw something I will never forget. It wasn't just animalistic fury, it was judgment. They had assessed us and decided we weren't worth killing, at least not today. But the message was clear. If we returned, if we tried this again, they would not be so merciful. They faded back into the woods, moving silently despite their size. Within seconds, it was as if they had never been there. We ran to James. He was alive, breathing but unconscious. He had a massive knot on the back of his head and probably broken ribs from that thing's grip. But he was alive. Derek called the extraction team on the satellite phone. He told them we had a medical emergency and needed immediate evacuation. He didn't mention that we had lost the creature. He didn't mention the attack. He just said James was severely injured and we needed out. It took us 3 hours to transport James back to the extraction point, taking turns carrying him on a makeshift stretcher we made from camping gear. Every step of the way, I could feel eyes watching us from the woods. But the creatures didn't show themselves again. They let us leave. When we finally reached the clearing, where we had originally been dropped off, the suit guy was waiting with a medevac helicopter. He looked even worse than when we'd last seen him, his suit rumpled, his face pale and gaunt. When we told him what had happened, that we had trapped one but others had freed it, I thought he might pass out. Instead, he just nodded as if he'd been expecting something like this. James was loaded into the helicopter and flown out of the area. The rest of us were driven back in vehicles, no talking for the entire ride. When we got back to civilization, we were made to sign documents. Non-disclosure agreements, waivers, all sorts of legal paperwork. We were paid the promised money plus extra for the danger they had put us in. The message was clear. Take the money, keep your mouth shut, and forget this ever happened. We never received an official explanation for what we had encountered in that forest. As far as the paperwork was concerned, nothing unusual had happened. But I knew better. And I could see from the way other rangers looked at me that word was spreading through unofficial channels about what had really happened out there. There were rumors of similar encounters in other parts of the country, stories about elite government teams specializing in dealing with cryptid situations, whispers of facilities where captured specimens were studied. Within a month, I learned that the entire forest area where we had been deployed had been quietly closed to the public. The official reason was unstable ground conditions that made hiking dangerous, but anyone familiar with the area knew that was nonsense. Roadblocks went up, no trespassing signs were posted, and the entire region was declared off-limits to civilians. But I heard through unofficial channels that they had brought in specialists, anthropologists, military personnel, people with equipment we had never seen before. Whatever these creatures were, the government was keenly interested in studying them and keeping their existence a secret from the public. I never knew what happened to the creature we had captured, though I have my suspicions. Part of me hopes they let it return to its family once they were done with whatever research they wanted to do. But given how interested those government scientists seemed, I doubt it was that simple. 6 months later, I requested a transfer to a different region, somewhere as far away from those woods as I could get. I told my supervisor it was for personal reasons, and he didn't ask for details. But I think he understood that some of us who had been on that assignment needed distance from what we had encountered. Even now, 3 years later, I still can't fully process what I experienced in that forest. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear those rumbling howls echoing through the darkness, or find myself scanning tree lines for massive shapes that shouldn't exist. I've heard rumors from other rangers about similar encounters in different parts of the country. Sightings that are covered up, evidence that disappears, witnesses who are transferred or suddenly decide to retire early. There's an informal network of people who have had experiences like mine, and sometimes we share information discreetly off the record. The official position, of course, is that these creatures don't exist. Any reports of unusual sightings are attributed to misidentified bears, hoaxes, or psychological stress from working alone in wilderness areas. But those of us who have seen them know better. What bothers me most is the realization of how long this has probably been going on. These creatures are not a recent phenomenon. They've been living in our forests for who knows how long, staying hidden, avoiding human contact. But as we've expanded into more remote areas and improved our surveillance technology, encounters have become more frequent. The government's response suggests they've been dealing with the situation for years, maybe decades. The specialized equipment, the established protocols, the network of people who know how to handle these situations, none of that develops overnight. This is a long-term operation that most people, including most government employees, are completely unaware of. But then I think about the intelligence of those creatures and their obvious ability to remain hidden when they want to. Maybe the current arrangement is for the best. They stay in the deep wilderness where most people never go. We stay in our cities and developed areas, and everyone is safer that way. I've thought about quitting the ranger service altogether and finding work in a city somewhere as far away from the wilderness as possible. But this is the only career I've ever known, and besides, someone needs to know what's really out there. Someone needs to be on the lookout for signs that these creatures are expanding their territory or becoming more aggressive towards humans, because that's what worries me most about the entire experience. The creatures we encountered weren't just defending their territory. They were studying us, learning our capabilities, our weaknesses, how we operate. The coordinated attack on our camp showed a level of tactical thinking that suggests they are capable of much more than just hiding in the woods. What happens when they decide coexistence no longer works? What happens when human expansion into remote areas reaches a tipping point where conflicts become inevitable? These creatures are strong enough to tear steel traps apart with their bare hands, intelligent enough to plan coordinated attacks, and apparently numerous enough to have family groups scattered across different forest areas. The government clearly has contingency plans for dealing with them. But I wonder if those plans are adequate for a species that has successfully avoided detection for hundreds or thousands of years. We caught one of them through luck and overwhelming firepower, but it was freed within hours, and we were completely driven out of their territory. The official reports of our mission were heavily redacted and classified, but I know they are being used to develop new protocols for future encounters. There are people in government facilities somewhere studying every detail of our experience, trying to understand the capabilities of these creatures and develop better methods for dealing with them. But I hope they are also considering the possibility that the best approach might be to simply leave them alone. Our brief encounter demonstrated that these creatures are perfectly capable of defending themselves and their territory. Perhaps the smartest thing we can do is establish clear boundaries and stick to them. The forest where we had our encounter remains closed to the public, and I know there are monitoring stations scattered throughout the area. Motion sensors, cameras, listening devices, all designed to track the creature's movements and behavior patterns. It's like they've turned the entire region into a giant research facility. I wonder what they've learned from all that surveillance. Are the creatures still there, or have they moved deeper into the wilderness to avoid human monitoring? Do they understand that they are being watched? And if so, how are they adapting to that knowledge? These are questions I will likely never have answers to. So, we're left in the strange situation where a small number of government officials and researchers know about the existence of unknown humanoid species, while the rest of the world remains oblivious. It's a secret that becomes heavier to carry as time goes on, especially when I see families heading out for camping trips in areas where these creatures might be present. If you don't believe this story, that's fine. I hope you never have to find out for yourself if I'm telling the truth or not. But if you ever find yourself in deep wilderness and get that feeling that something is watching you, trust that instinct. If you hear sounds that don't match any animal you know, if you find footprints that are too big and too human-like, if the forest around you becomes completely silent, get out. Don't try to investigate. Don't try to get photos or proof. Just leave as fast and as quietly as you can. And don't look back, because once they know you've seen them, they don't forget. And they don't forgive. All I know is that these creatures are real. They are intelligent, and they are still out there. and everyone who ventures into their territory deserves to know what they might be walking into. For now, they seem content to stay in the deep wilderness, far from human populations. But climate change, deforestation, and the continued expansion of human development into remote areas means that encounters are likely to become more frequent. And when they do, we're going to need people who understand what we're really dealing with. For more interesting stories, check this out.